I've always had this interest. It's not just something that's come about out of nowhere. I've always wanted to do it. But it was like, okay, well, if you're a boy, then you would have kind of been pushed that way. Because I was a girl, I was like, no, I don't think that's quite for you. And so it was coming over that mental hurdle. That was probably what took me a year.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Code of Career with me, Cameron Blackwood. Today's guest is Louise Shambrook. Now, if you've hung out on our Discord server or at any of our events, you will know who Louise is. She is one of the moderators on the server and provides really good advice for people looking to improve their CVs and interview application processes. And it's really been long overdue, so we are really excited to release this one. It's filled with amazing advice for people who are looking at career changing and getting the most out of the first few years of their new career. On today's episode, we'll talk a lot about how data engineering works, and if you decide to work in data, what it might look like when you're career changing and the challenges around it. We'll also talk around the challenges and difficulties faced by women in technology, both before they get into the industry and after they've already broken in. And we'll also hear about how the software Louise works on helps people trace back family members from hundreds of years ago. If you enjoyed the show, please do give us a review on Apple Podcasts, share it with a friend, and if you want to upskill, we do have a deal with Zero to Mastery. I learnt to code with them myself, so I highly recommend them. You can check them out in the description. But without further ado, here's my conversation with Louise Shambrook. Hey Louise, thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. It's like become a massive tradition, as viewers and listeners will know, to just talk about the weather. And you're in Edinburgh as well, so it would only be appropriate. Just how nice the weather is currently in the middle of June. It is unreal. I've been sunburnt multiple times, which is always impressive for Scotland, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I'm actually really grateful for is that it rained last night, because our lawn was looking so dry, and we're going on holiday on Thursday, and I was like, if it doesn't rain, we're just going to come home to nothing.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it really chucked it down. I remember my cat hasn't seen rain in about a month, and he was just sat out the window just staring at it. We'd had all the windows open as well, and then obviously because it hasn't rained in so long, it didn't kind of click, and then like, oh no, everything is getting water inside. So just had a mad dash. Luckily our flat's not too big, so it didn't take too long, but mad dash of shutting all the windows. But I never thought I'd be glad to see rain in Scotland, but here we are.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's nice that we've got a bit more water now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good for the plants. If it's good for the plants, it's good for everyone. So for anyone who tunes in to the podcast and then checks out the community around our Discord or comes to our events, they're probably going to be pretty familiar with who you are already. But perhaps for our listeners who haven't done that, do you want to say a little bit about who you are and what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a background in social work. I'm a qualified social worker, no longer registered. And I was working in Waltham Forest in London right up until the pandemic started. And that was probably one of the worst times to be working in like health and social care services. So eventually, my husband and I moved up to Scotland during the pandemic still. But that meant that I had to naturally get a new job because we can't really work remotely from Scotland in London. So I had this opportunity to kind of decide, do I want to get out now? Which I did. I was really fed up. I was really stressed. But then that left kind of the open decision of, well, what am I going to do now? So I spent some time looking, spent some time researching. And my husband, who is a senior software developer, he said, you need to be in tech like 10 years ago. So I kind of looked into it. I was like, I don't really like JavaScript. I don't really like that kind of stuff. But then I stumbled onto data and I was like, yes, this is my vibe. This is what I love. So I ended up attending CodeClan at the end of 2021, doing their professional data analysis course. And I finished in February 2022 and got a job pretty much right away, ironically as a software engineer. But that was working on an internal product where we process data, so it does make sense. And then since then I changed teams in January this year, so I'm now working in machine learning.
That's a really exciting transition into what's actually quite a different kind of part of the industry that most people end up in. I think a lot of people are pretty intimidated to end up in the data side of things, even if they find it interesting, because you get this assumption, and particularly machine learning as well, you get this assumption where it's like, oh, I will have had to have done maths all the way through uni. And like, I know I feel that way. I mean, I gave up maths when I was 16 because I just didn't take it on to A level. And yeah, I would be scared of doing data stuff even now. So yeah, that's really awesome that you went into that side of things. Was there a reason why that area appealed over the likes of stuff like JavaScript?
Yeah, I feel like with JavaScript, with kind of software development, you have to be really good at like visualizing a product, how you want it to work, how you want it to interact with it. The difference I feel with data is you have data there, you interact with it directly, you can manipulate it, you can kind of understand, you can take things from it, which is what about all data analysis is. It's about gaining insights from the data. But also it's like when you have these massive data sets, and we're talking like thousands of columns, millions of rows, it's about structuring your data in a way that you can then use going forward, because you don't want to just like work with like all the data. That's too much. You want to kind of be able to pick, okay, I want this one, this one, this one. So really it's about organizing things. It's about looking at, okay, I've got all this stuff, now I need to make it into a certain size, and then I'll take that forward. And I love that. I love organizing things. Anyone who has seen my kitchen will be like, I am the most organized person in the world. But that comes from, I take everything out on the floor and then I look at, okay, I want this in this place, this in this place, and data's no different.
Yeah, I can definitely see the kind of connection there, because it's all about manipulating things to be used in the easiest way possible for both yourself and future users, be that developers or kind of end users, depending on who's going to be using your product. And the company you're working for at the moment, there's the kind of place that would have tons of data, so I'd imagine it's a pretty interesting role.
Yeah, so it's for those who don't know, I work for FindMyPast. We're a genealogy business, so you can go on our website, build your family tree. But what we specialize in is historical records, and we have so many data sets, it's ridiculous. But on top of that, we then also have like data about our users, because well, everyone does. So like when you then compile all that together, and the other thing that we also have is we digitize newspapers in collaboration with the British Library. And I think as of now, we've published 66 million pages. And when you publish a newspaper online, it's not just like the text and the image itself, you also have all the metadata, and then how they all interconnect. So it's just, there's so much data. And what I love about data is it tells you so much about people. It says so much about you, and that's what we really love at Find My Past, is kind of connecting the current you to the like who you were in the past and your family and stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then what I like with the newspaper side of things is that, because I remember you chatting about this at the event that we went that we held back in May, is the fact that you're bridging this gap between how we used to do records and how we can do records now more efficiently, and also all the challenges that come with digitizing such a vast amount of newspaper, because one a day for every region of the UK or wherever, I can imagine that adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. There is. I mean, we've not even like touched the surface of what there is in terms of like digitizing newspapers, but also just historical records. I mean, we haven't even got onto like books and things like that. There's so much stuff. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of seeing that, I guess, that transition. And this is again what I love about the fact that we've got things going back to like the 1700s, and newspapers in the 1700s were just different to how we see them today. Today they're much more like tabloid style. It's a much more like, there's a lot of visual images, because well, back in the day, like cameras weren't a thing.
Yeah.
So it's just being able to kind of see that across history. And really that's one of our other kind of fundamental beliefs, is we respect history and we want to preserve it for the next generation. Because the fact is, I mean, there's a lot of people say that print is a dying art. It's not. It's more the challenge with historical things is they will die. They won't last forever. Paper does eventually degrade. Print degrades. And we want to be able to keep that for the future generations, because there's just so much amazing information in those historical records. It captures, I can't remember the word for it, but like I think it's zeitgeist. Like it captures where is society at this point in time, what's capturing our interest. And yeah, if we don't keep that, well then that's just like a lot of information that's going to go lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes so much deeper than a lot of people would assume. Where you're talking about the scanning newspapers, like my first instinct when you said it would be like, oh, you're looking for like dates in terms of like obituaries and that kind of thing. But actually, like, you know, you're saying about the zeitgeist, you can do your sentiment analysis, the language analyzing, and that kind of thing. And I guess with large language models and ChatGPT, etc., becoming so prevalent now, the potential you could use that for as well, in combination with the work, means that like you could build up an amazing picture. So it sounds really cool.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things we're not kind of working on it at the moment because we've got our other projects, but it's something that where we're definitely keeping it in the back of our mind because we're going through so many newspaper pages, so many records, but also but we want to kind of see how could, I guess, the theory of what we're doing at the moment with machine learning applied on a bigger scale. So like you say, could we it wouldn't be any day soon, but could we just put a whole newspaper article through ChatGPT and it would tell us all this amazing stuff? And that is a long way away because the problem with historical records such as newspapers is they do degrade over time, because a lot of what we do is from microfilm, but then it's already been processed once, so then some of the quality is already dropped. And then when we put that through an OCR machine, so optical character recognition, and you try and kind of capture the words into actually like digital text, all these tiny little newspaper smudges just becomes random stuff. Yeah. So having to kind of totally redo a lot of what we've done, because it's just not great quality. And that's not kind of a diss on anyone who's worked with it. It's just that is the fact. That is what happens when you work with old text. And I mean, some may think like, old, yeah, okay, 1950s. I mean, we're talking 1800s here. It is dying. But yeah, I guess once we get those problems solved, once we get over that hurdle, I'm so excited to see like what could we do, especially now that we are really beginning to work with machine learning and really kind of understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And turning the clock back a little bit in your career, how was that actual experience between deciding, yeah, I want to get into STEM and the technology industry in general from a completely different original professional background? How was that process from the point where you, I imagine, decide one day that you want to do CoClan for sure, which is a great organization, great way to learn, to the point where you go through the process, and like, what were the biggest takeaways you had, and how was that experience?
So I think we kind of have to turn the clock back even further, because I mean, there probably was a definitive point where I said, yes, I'm going to do it. But that was after roughly a year of searching and thinking. I think the main question for me was, can I do this? Because the problem is, as a woman in tech, I had this embedded belief that I just can't do this. Not for any kind of like putting down on myself thing. It was just more, I guess, this very fundamental thing of, no, girls can't do that. That's just like, we're just not wired that way.
Like a societal thing.
Yeah, definitely. And it was just kind of getting over that hurdle. And that's why, like I said, I did take a really, really long time. And I really kind of questioned myself, like, no, can I actually do this? Will this just be a waste of my time, or will I take it somewhere? And that was really hard to get over. There's so many things that kind of enable it, but there's also not enough that disables it, that like kind of pushes against it. And that's where, again, CoClan are really good in that way. They really do push for everyone to come through. There's also Code First Girls, they are absolutely amazing. They're very similar to CoClan, except it's for women and girls only, because they again fundamentally believe, no, everyone can do this. It's not just that you're wired differently. We all come from kind of the same thing. But I guess turning it back even further, when I then kind of looked back on my history, I was like, okay, so when I was 14, I was put on like this it was a science camp for a week, and I was the one from my school selected to do this, and it was with like I think 50 other young people, and it was an attempt to get more young people into STEM, because back then, like we're talking early noughties, that just wasn't the thing to do. Like that was just not popular at all. And I came away from that and I was like, I really love this stuff. Like, we did some very basic programming on it. We did like some engineering.
I've always had
really,
this interest.
Really cool
it's not
stuff.
just something that's come about.
But I came away from it and I was like,
I've always wanted to do it.
That was a fun little thing.
But it was like, okay,
well,
and
this
is
where
boy,
you then you would see that ableism just happening
that way
because
I was a girl.
There was no one who kind of came up to me and said,
right for you.
No, you had
and so it was coming over.
That is exactly the whole point.
That was probably what took me a year.
Everyone was just like, yeah, like kind of little pat on the head, well done. So that kind of then led me to when I did my A levels. I was like, okay, well, I'll just kind of do some of the more softer subjects like languages and stuff. And then coming out of college, I was like, well, I don't really know what I want to do. But that, again, no one kind of really put those things together for me and said, actually, you really love like chemistry and coding, so you should follow that. So that when I then eventually went to university, which I did quite late, I kind of gravitated towards social work, so social care, because that's just kind of, I guess, what women do. It's just, that's what's accepted, I guess. And again, what I loved most about my course was actually researching.
There's not many other blokes.
Like all the other stuff, I mean, of course I enjoyed it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. But
about going into something
was digging
it's like,
into,
I don't
academic
know.
articles.
I'm trying to think of another example.
It was like, well, that should have then
at my primary school, there was only one, or elementary school for our international listeners, there was only one male teacher, and I wondered like what it was like for him going into that, being the only one in a school with like 15 teachers, being the only one. And it adds an extra dimension of difficulty. So it was hard enough to career change in terms of like actually learning all the new skills without having to deal with the other aspect of it that you're mentioning there. And I think whilst we're going in the right direction in terms of pushing all kids into STEM. There needs to 100% be more encouragement and like more insights. And I think I'm definitely trying to think about what I could potentially do to kind of help people earlier on in their careers, because I think it's for the simple reason that diverse people build better products, because like your users are diverse, right? And
absolutely. And I think that's one thing I've kind of definitely discovered in my place at FindMyPast, because I do love a lot of the admin work, and I did a lot of that like as a profession when I was younger. But then coming into a technical team, they're like, oh, we're so disorganized. I'm like, don't worry, I'll sort you out. So it is really good to kind of have those. It's just important to kind of not then, I guess, push people away, because it's one thing that's often seen in technical teams and companies is women will automatically get lumped with that kind of work because, again, that's what they do. And like I said, there are definitely strengths to that diversity, because, like you say, that is one thing that I could very quickly. It was quite an easy win for me and a quick in. It's then just making sure, okay, well, you don't just have to do that. Like you can do it if you want, that's great, but you should be on par with everyone else. And I think that's one of the things I definitely see a lot in just like the general tech sphere, that women aren't perceived to be as competent as men. And I saw an article on, I think it was on LinkedIn the other day, which is the challenge for female leaders, which is they can't be perceived to be likable and competent at the same time. And that's just one of the many, many barriers. But I think going back to what you said about like what you can do, I think the best thing and the easiest thing anyone can do is talking about it. And just beginning to raise those challenges, because it's the same with any other conversation where someone is in a minority and they're being discriminated against for that reason. It's the first step is always, well, am I a part of this? And in that case, what can I do? And as long as we kind of try to keep a lid on that conversation, we will only be making it worse for ourselves.
Yeah, that's what I was going to just ask, actually, in terms of so the listener base for this show is, I think last time I looked at the stats, it's 70% male. Like I was going to say, it is the best thing for men to do, to talk about it. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you advise people who are doubting themselves like early on, either in this context or just in general? What advice would you give to someone having now gone through the career changing process of being an accomplished professional in this area?
It would probably be just do it. Which is such an easy thing to say is when you're on the other side, but it's really just do it. and try something and get out there and learn. Because what the thing that I love the most about tech is where it stands in opposition to social care. And what I mean by that is, in tech, failing is a part of the job. You write tests so that they fail. You always want to break your product, because that way you kind of find the areas that you need to improve. And that was probably one of the big things I had to get over quite early in CodeClan, because we were writing something, I don't know what, and I was like, no, it's breaking, I'm getting all these errors. And so I went up to one of my tutors, and he was like, no, this is a good thing, this is where you should be. And just changing that mindset, because in social care, like, if something goes wrong, then it's like, no, we don't talk about that. And it's one of those things, it's become kind of a self-serving problem, because the moment you do, then you will, then everyone will come down on you. And I read a really good book about this recently. Can't remember what it was called, but it was written by it was written by someone who was an Olympic champion in ping pong, of everything.
Oh, Malcolm Gladwell, or am I thinking of someone else?
No, I think that's someone else, but I think I've got it on my bookshelf. Anyway, he was talking about it's a very similar juxtaposition. So he was talking about healthcare versus aviation, because again, in aviation, after everything, you will, even the tiniest near miss, you will analyze the problem, you'll dig out the faults, and then you'll kind of write a slightly improved manual for next time. Whereas in healthcare, you don't talk about errors, because then it will all come down on you. And to change this is just like, it's so hard to do. It probably won't happen in our lifetimes. But anyway, that's I love that juxtaposition, because I've gone from a profession where, okay, no, we try and cover our backs as much as we can, because otherwise we will be the ones, like, it will be pinned on you exactly, to somewhere where, okay, no, this is just what we do. And that's why, kind of going back to your question, the sooner you do something, the sooner you will find out, okay, if I'm going in the slightly right direction, continue. If not, okay, analyze the problem and keep going. Because it does create momentum, and it creates this thing of, okay, this didn't slightly work, so what can I think of next?
Yeah, exactly. It's like scientists experiment, and every time something goes, an experiment doesn't work, it brings you closer to the end result. And a conversation I really liked on the show a few episodes ago was with Lee Jones, who you spoke on the panel with. And Lee was talking about how, when he was a kid learning on his VTech laptop, programming BASIC, he said that the line that stuck out for him in the manual that he still remembers now, sort of however many years later, was that no matter what you do, you probably won't break the computer. So that's a big thing to remember, is the fact that we learn from mistakes and get comfortable with the errors. And for me, like, maybe I'm showing myself as a bad developer here, but I get excited when I see a new error message, because that means that I've solved the old one.
Yeah, exactly. And that's and as some, like, when we did unit tests at CodeClan, I was like, no, I'm staying far away from that. I don't like unit tests. So where I am now, like, we are very much kind of test driven development. And like you say, okay, so we can't get this test to pass, we kind of tweak something, and then, like you say, okay, now it's a new error, but that means that we've moved on. That means, like you say, you have solved the previous problem. And I really do think that career switching and all the challenges that comes with can easily fall into the same framework. It's okay, well, I'm setting a goal of something, I'll take a movement towards that. If I stumble over something, that's fine. Like, you're not, we as a society, we really have this thing of, okay, well, failure equals, like, you are just gone, and it's just not that bad. But I have definitely been there, and I was absolutely terrified of starting CodeClan. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. Like, no one was going to come and tell me, like, no, now you have to move out of the UK. We have these weird ideas kind of, in our minds. But once I kind of got into it, it was like, okay, so I'm doing, like, a certain amount of homeworks each day. Some of them I get, some of them I don't. But the ones that I don't, okay, I go back next day, and then I learn something as a consequence of them. And I think that's just the main thing.
Yeah, I think definitely speaking up as well, particularly earlier on in your career, be that when you're in the process of switching or in early on in the first jobs, or well, I mean, any time in a career really, but especially like my first job, I used to, and I don't know why, because my boss was so nice. Like I used to always try and like hide my mistakes or like hide my misunderstandings and that kind of thing. And then I think a while in, I can't remember if he said or if I just decided for myself. I was like, you know what? Actually, I give up. I'm just going to ask the question. And you know what? I started improving so much quicker after that because it was silly. It wasn't like I was in competition with the guy. He had like 20 years experience and I had 2 months experience. And I had this resource essentially of someone who was happy to help me. And yet I was too embarrassed to go to him with questions about how something works, or if he'd say, do you understand this? And I'd nod and not necessarily 100% understand it. And it's silly how we almost trick ourselves into thinking if something goes wrong once or it doesn't work right the whole time, then that's it. Because like every great invention and every great product has been iterated through so many failures. I think it's more of a business than a software engineering quote, but he is a software engineer. I think his name's Max Letchev, one of the founders of PayPal. He said, I've failed 4 companies and I founded 5, and the 5th was PayPal. And it's you've got to go through these failures and pick up learnings. And the way I see it as learnings. I always try and tell myself I either win or learn, be that in building my own side businesses or my day job or recording this podcast. Like, sometimes I mess up the microphones like I nearly did before the start of this episode. But I recently had to re-record an episode, luckily with a very understanding guest, because, you learn from these failures. And now I go through a checklist before we start recording. So now I don't have to ask you to give up 2 different podcast recording slots, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me very much of one of the stories that was in a aforementioned book. I can't remember the name of, but one of the stories he went through was James Dyson, who obviously founded the Dyson company. And what was really interesting about his story, and I guess not very different from a lot of what we've spoken about, but it was he started with a problem, which was he hated vacuum cleaners. He absolutely hated them. And he kept thinking there must be something better. And he went to, I think it was a sawmill, and he saw the way that like all the dust was extracted. And he was like, I could use that. And he built like a very, very crude model, and it worked. And then he kind of just kept, like you say, iterating on that. And I think the number quoted was something like 7,100 prototypes he had to go through, because each one didn't quite work the way that he wanted it to, but he just kept at it. And I think that's where we very easily fall down at that first hurdle. It's like, okay, well, I've got a problem. Here's a little idea. It doesn't work the way I've imagined it, so I'm just going to give up. And it's so hard to get over. But I mean, the potential that it brings is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge mindset shift that you have to go through. But once you go through it, it becomes so much more rewarding. But like without getting into too deep of conversation, I think it definitely starts in school, because everything's pass fail, right? Like, I think I remember having to sit and do like actual exam hall exams at the age of 9, I think. Like, we'd all be shot in the hall. And it's like, what's productive out of that? Like, and imagine, like, kids that had failed those exams, like, what's that going to do to their self-esteem in something that's such an inconsequential thing at the age of 9? Like, what's that going to do to your psyche? And you're going to see everything. And even if you pass, you're still going to see everything as pass-fail all the way through your life. And, like, it's kind of like I almost expected to get like a school report in my first job and that kind of thing, just because you're so used to how these things work. It's a huge question how you change those attitudes, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, like you say, it's like school is its whole own thing. But I think one of the other problems, like very fundamental problems with school, is everything is, like you say, it's taught pass fail, but you're not kind of taught how to solve that problem. You're taught, so for example with maths, like there's a specific formula you need to apply, and then that's it. There's no kind of analyzing the problem, thinking about, okay, what are the different approaches I could take? I'll try them and then see where I am. And again, that's where places like CodeClan are so great, because what mattered most, like I think that we had 7 homework questions a night, something like that. It was quite a lot. But the whole point was you try and show us what you've tried, and we'll then talk through it and work through it. Because then you are kind of, that they're really trying to encroach that mindset of, you need to try, you need to kind of begin to solve these problems for yourself. And then, like you said, when I got into my job, I was like, okay, well, I think when I'm about to pass my probation, I expect like this full report. But really, it was much more on that day-to-day level of, am I actually kind of applying my critical thinking, my problem solving? And I think that's one of the skills that is fundamentally so valued across all of tech. It's not kind of that software development at data split. It's just, you need to be able to look at problems in a very constructive way and then begin to take an approach.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about the passing a probation meeting and you go in thinking it's going to be some huge thing, because I did exactly the same thing. Because 3 out of my 4 jobs post-uni, they forgot about my probation. And then like 6 months in, no, you're fine. And you go in thinking like, oh, crikey, it's probation day, 12 weeks from the start. And then like nothing happens. You're like, oh, okay, so am I getting a P45 in the post? Like, is that what's going on? But yeah, it's funny. I think it's really interesting what you say about how you go back in with the homework as well at CoClan, and you talk through it. Because I also think as well, something I've since I've got to the point in my career where I've started like helping juniors, it's made me a much better software engineer to ask them how they think and how they approach solving a problem. And then if they ask me why something works the way it does, a lot of the time I'm like, do you know what? Actually, I'm not sure. Let me go and find out. Let me go and read up on this. Or we'll like look at we'll screen share, because we work remote. We'll screen share and like look at the page together and talk it through. It's such a good way for, in a lot of ways, juniors can teach seniors just as much as seniors can teach juniors, for sure. And I think that's a bit of a mental block to get over if you're on the junior side, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually know very little about the data side of things at CoClan, or just in general. What's a typical day look like when you're learning at someone like CoClan? Then what does a typical day look like when you're actually on the job?
So do you mean on the job or at CoClan?
Both. So firstly at CoClan and then on the job. Well, whichever way around you want to go.
No worries. So yeah, at CoClan, I think the first week was the most difficult, because you had to suddenly get involved and learn about this whole thing called data, and data is massively complex, and then the other thing of actually programming with it. So I think, yeah, the first week, that was kind of its own thing. After that, you were kind of up and running. So the majority of the course is taught in R, which is a statistical programming language. It's been used for like since the 70s. It's quite old, but it's mainly used for like mass scale statistical analysis. It's really good for programming in, but if that's not where you're at, then Python is probably the language most used, which we were taught quite late in the course, but that's because it's very easy to pick up. So yeah, I think we had them in blocks, which is very similar to on software development. The first kind of block was about just getting to work with data, learning to clean it, learning to manipulate it to do the things that you want it to do. And the cleaning one, I think, is really interesting, especially because when I kind of speak to program, like, I guess software devs, they don't really kind of understand that bit of it. They're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, you just like fill it in. I'm like, yeah, but you've got millions of rows. How are you just going to do that? But also the implications of that. So let's say you've got, the one I hate the most is when there's free form text block or text entry thing, so you can just like write in whatever you want. Because my husband says, oh yeah, that's great, because it's so easy to code and then you don't have to worry about all these problems. I'm like, yeah, do you realize how many people write rubbish in there? And then you have to think about, how am I going to work with this? It's awful. Because that was our first big project, was this like really big analysis across, I think it was like 3 years of a data set. And most of the like entry things, they were freeform text, and people will just write rubbish in there. There was like things about Trump, even though it was about sweets. That was so random. So yeah, I guess the implications of like cleaning your data. So let's say you want to drop everything where someone's written rubbish. Okay, well, you've now lost half your data set. then what? What are you now going to do?
It's a classic situation where software devs think something's, because I would have been exactly the same. Stick a text error in there. They can write what they want. That's brilliant. Like, we can get so much qualitative information, and then you pass it on to data who then have to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, no, I want like a drop down or something. And drop downs look terrible on iPhones. I will not disagree with that. But it's so much better because then you know what you're going to get back. So yeah, it's not that differently structured to the software development course. So you have I think we had kind of lectures or what's it called? It was like pairing coding along type thing in the morning, and then in the afternoon we had labs, and then homework in the evening. It was more kind of what was taught. So like I said, the first block was data wrangling, that kind of stuff. The next block was a probability, kind of the more model building side of it. Oh no, I tell a lie. I think the next one was on data visualization, which is massive if you're going to work as a business analyst, because then you need to kind of cleaning your data, but you really need to be able for it to tell a story, for you to kind of say, okay, well, when we plot out the data, this is what it looks like. Because visualizations are great. It helps everybody, but it is definitely its own skill. It's like, you can't just put stuff on a plot. But also data will, like the type of plot you choose, that will kind of, it has to fit a certain need. And the amount of pie charts I see, I hate. They're so awful. They're so difficult to read. And so yeah, that's kind of, so yeah, I think that's the second block. And then it's into model building. So things like linear regressions, probability, knowing how to kind of, augment your data if you don't have enough. A lot of those things. And I think that was probably one of the most difficult ones, because like you say, there is this kind of misconception, I guess, about data and maths. It's not entirely a misconception. It's just the level of which you need to know it. So you definitely do need to understand like some basic probability, some basic, what are they called? Equations, things like that. You kind of need to be able to read a bit of maths. The good thing about computers is they do most of it for you. You just need to know what to input. And then that was our kind of our last block. And then we did I think a week on SQL, a week on Python, and that was pretty much it. So now on my job, like I said, the first kind of position I had, that was on a team where we maintained an internal tool to process data, which had the massive user base of 3. So that was good, because that meant that we didn't have to worry too much about like, well, if we break things, then but also we were in very close contact with them. So that was built using Ruby on Rails, and then we use SQL to kind of interrogate our databases. But once I kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm comfortable with this, then I switched teams into machine learning, which was then, it was basically like starting over because I didn't really know Python that well. Getting to work with Jupyter. And then on top of that, like large language models such as BERT, Roberta. I think the type of models we've ended up using are BILSTM. It stands for something, don't ask me what.
I was going to say that went straight over my head. BILSTM, I hadn't.
Yeah, I think it's a bidirectional language. It's something to do with that. It tries to understand the syntax.
Yeah.
Of words or like of sentences, which is quite cool that you can get a model to do that. I don't get how it does it, but it does. But then kind of, I guess, working with machine learning on like an industrial scale, like we do, and understanding things like epochs and loss, and that was it's a big learning curve, but it's really good fun because we're working on this really, really cool project, and there's only 3 of us, which means I actually get to do a lot of stuff. I'm not just kind of sitting there shadowing people, and yeah, a lot of our days just go with, okay, well, we run a lot of trial code, a lot of prototype code in Jupyter. Once we're kind of happy with it, then we pull it over into our source controlled Git repo, build our modules, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
It sounds really, really cool. And I like what you say about how you've always got to be learning new stuff, because I was actually thinking the other day, how boring would it be to just be in a job for like 40 years and knowing you're never actually going to do anything new in this business function, and this is just your life. Like I don't think I'd last more than a few weeks. Like this is what I love about working in this industry. And for anyone who hasn't broken in yet and is feeling maybe a bit disheartened about it, like if you enjoy the process of learning, then this is such a good industry, because people sometimes talk about it like it's a negative. Oh, you got to roll with the punches. But it's the feeling that you get to constantly like improve on your skills. It's really satisfactory, I find.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on this, I think just the other day. Again, it's this juxtaposition of social work and tech. And I was thinking, like, okay, yeah, we had to do like continuous professional development, but that was literally just to tick a box. So you'd maybe attend a course twice a year, and then that would be kind of enough credits. There was no real sense of, okay, well, I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to kind of learn from my colleagues and all of this stuff. It was more just kind of, okay, I'm chugging along doing my stuff. And I think that was part of what made me really stressed as well, because I was like, I don't get what I'm actually doing here. I'm just kind of doing something day in, day out. Because one of the things that people say that they love about social work and healthcare is that every day is different, which it is, except it's just kind of more of the same, if that makes sense. It's like, well, what are we actually doing? We're not really changing anything. It's just we're trying to not like drown every day. Whereas in tech, like you say, it's just constantly learning. And it kind of going back to what we were saying, you definitely have to get comfortable with failure. You have to get comfortable with you're not always going to be best, but that's okay. And that's definitely been one of the things where my self-esteem has really swapped, because I used to feel really, really threatened by people who were better than me. I always used to take it really personally. Whereas now I'm like, okay, great, teach me, tell me what to do. I want to learn from you. You're awesome.
Yeah, I know exactly the feeling. Like I came from a background of sales, and that's like so like cutthroat, and like in terms of like all that matters is your name and number on the leaderboard. I mean, I think the way sales culture works is horrendous, because it just encourages people to backstab each other, basically. Certainly in the kind of organizations that I worked in, but you know, you just see everyone else's competition. And it's like you see whoever's at the top, and it's like, I am going to take them down, like no matter what. And I mean, shock horror, I'd burn out in like 2 years. But like it's one of those ones where you can, especially with open source technology, it's like you can learn so easily from everyone. Like when I first discovered open source, I was like, these idiots have made everything like available for free, all of their secrets. This is brilliant. And then, you know, I started digging into it and then understanding what the philosophy actually meant. And I was like, this is so cool and such an amazing way of doing things. I can't think of many industries where we literally share essentially a load of trade secrets with each other, just to kind of, just because, you know, because it's kind of good on personal branding. Like it's amazing. And also as well, for anyone who's still learning, I don't know if it was just me that did this. I used to think using open source like packages was cheating. It's not, just everyone does it. So it's like, imagine if like on the data side of things, imagine if you were building like complete like new models from scratch and like reinventing, I'm trying to think of all the libraries that I've used back in the day, like pandas for Python. Imagine you just rebuilt that every time. Like, what would be the point?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also something that's very reflective of the culture around tech in general, which is, it is very open, it's very welcoming. And when I kind of got started in tech, I was like, there's going to be a catch. Someone's going to come up to me at some point and say, nah, can you go away now? Like, you were getting fed up of you. But it's not. Like, everyone is just so happy to share with each other, to help each other kind of move up. And that's why I love being part of like this podcast and Code a Career, and just the community in general, because I have got a very varied career, but that also means I have skills to help other people up. And that's exactly what tech is about. It's always about helping each other out where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point to lean on as a career changer, because no matter what you've done before, I think a lot of the time when you get into this new industry, there comes with, well, one, there's the imposter syndrome of like, oh, you know, I've got to start a new thing. Then also as well, I can certainly say I had a bit of an ego hit, like when I was like, great, I'm starting from the very bottom again. But you have to frame it differently. I find, for people often say to me, I've worked 20 years in XYZ career and now I'm moving on to this. is it too late? And it's never too late, because there are some really amazing people that didn't get into this career until their 40s, 50s, or even later, and have gone on to do absolutely amazing work. And I think it's something where you can lean on your previous career massively, and it gives you a unique value add compared to the comp sci grads that aren't really a competition, but you may end up seeing them as competition. Because you have an edge to yourself and a niche that other people don't have, that's super unique. Like, for example, from your side, how many other devs have experience in social work? From my side, how many have done tech sales and recruitment? Like, not many. It gives you a unique perspective to bring up in interviews and talk about the value add you can have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of definitely for me, it reared its head in the weirdest way possible, I think. Because I did a talk recently at CodeClan. It was like a year since I left, a year since I left CodeClan, and I was kind of talking about what's happened since then. And one of my points was around exactly that. Your being a career switcher is not a bad thing. Quite the opposite. It is an amazing thing, because you bring skills that probably no one else will. And the story that I told, and yeah, it is 100% true, is we were back in like February, March time, we were doing our annual 360, so getting feedback from other people, which would then feed into like our progression framework, etc. And my tech lead, like in my team, we were just chatting one day, and then she went, by the way, so how do you give feedback? Could you give me some pointers on that? And that was a moment where I was like, hang on, you've been in this industry for 6 years, you've got a PhD in physics, and you're asking me? And that was where I was like, actually, no, because a big part of the social work course is constantly reflecting on your practice. It's constantly thinking, could I be doing better? It's again analyzing the position, and thinking what's wrong, what's right, and how can I kind of constructively feedback to myself, to others. As a part of social work, you have to do placements as well. So in the second year, it's 70 days. In the third year, it's 100 days. And around these, you have to build like this massive report about like, okay, so I've been observed by someone else, so I have to write a reflection on their reflection. I'm also having to write these reflective accounts of my work. And it's literally it's relentless. You're always having to do this, but it does equip you with those skills of A, giving good feedback, and B, getting good feedback and using that. So I was like, okay, well, actually, yeah, I can tell you a lot about this, because that's what I've done for quite a few years now. And like you said, if I hadn't gone into tech, like that is something unique that I bring. And that is, I mean, this is what a lot of this conversation is about, but that diversity is just so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. The diversity of professional experience is huge. And because especially if you're building some kind of commercially facing product as well, it can be really useful to have worked in a different industry, because you bring a perspective. And then because in my case, it's kind of been quite a boring way to let my previous experiences come up, because of the former technical recruiter. It's like, Cam, can you jump on this interview, please? It's more or less what it boils down to. But I don't mind. It's fun to brush off the old box of tricks in an interview. Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know why people get so well. Of course, I know why people get nervous about the idea of, I've done all this time, another career. Like, tech is not. I think tech is one of the most open-minded industries when it comes to people switching into doing something new. So, if you're looking at getting back into work after taking some time off, or you're not finding, you're either finding what you're doing too stressful or not interesting enough, it's such a great option to get in. And like, I think I try not to talk, even though the show is careers focused, I try not to let it turn into like, here's how you maximize your income. But something I always say is like, how many other industries pay as much as this, and yet don't have all of the prerequisites? Like, imagine just rocking up at an investment bank and just being like, oh yeah, I want to be a trader. Like, it might have worked back in the 70s or whatever, but not anymore. And, this industry is well compensated. And but yet it doesn't matter if you have a PhD or left school at 16. It's about, if you can do the skills properly and be pleasant to work with, then that's all that matters, whether you're self-taught or you have a Harvard CS degree.
Yeah, and I think that kind of also ties in with one of the things, something I've been thinking about recently, and that has been coming up a lot. So the first place it came up for me was during CoClan. You have like a careers week, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I know a lot. I know a lot of the stuff. But one of the things that I really loved was the career coach at the time. She did this really good presentation about like preparing for interviews and all this stuff. And two of the key points she made was knowing your USP, so your unique selling points, and knowing your worth. And as I've kind of settled into tech, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I do bring quite a lot of USPs. I bring, for example, that I can reflect properly. I bring a lot of admin skills because there's a ridiculous amount of work in paperwork and social work. But I bring a lot of the knowledge about like equality, about supporting those who are underrepresented, about kind of lifting them up. And yeah, that means actually I bring quite a lot of good stuff. So yeah, I should be compensated in kind, and standing by that. And it's something that it can feel really hard to do. And it definitely did for me when I was like doing interviews and stuff. And I was like, no, I want to be paid properly. But there's nothing wrong with that. And you're not selfish for doing that. You're just saying, I have this, this, and this that I bring, which no one else does. So you should pay me properly.
Yeah, 100%. Like knowing your worth is like absolutely massive, and I think it's very British for us not to talk about salaries or money or anything like that. But it can be a good idea. I mean, not to the point where like you're bragging about it or like laughing at someone else's salary. I mean, obviously, 99% of people would never do that. But it's one of those ones where open conversations are important, and that's partially why I set this whole thing up originally, because I figured there's so much stuff that will go into depth around how to use the latest React library correctly, and like that's obviously super important, but there's not much stuff around, and the reason why it's called the Code of Career is because the focus is on the second C. And I love to see, to be blunt, I love to see people in the tech world get paid. And that's part of the original motivation for setting this whole thing up, is because people should know their worth. And it's, if you work in private enterprise, the company's profiting off your skills. You may as well get in a share of that, right? You're the one providing the skills, so you should be compensated for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of like that it goes back to what we were talking about, supporting women in tech, because it's exactly the same thing you need to do, because as long as you keep trying to put a lid on it, it will benefit no one. So it's exactly the same philosophy. The more we can talk, the more we can then begin to move forward. And it also goes back to what we were talking about with error being a fundamental thing. Okay, yeah, you're probably going to be confronted with a few things you're doing wrong. That's not a bad thing. It's not a judgment of you as a person. It's more, okay, I can see I'm doing this, this, and this. I shouldn't. So what am I going to learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this last kind of bit of conversation was the perfect way to kind of, we're more or less exactly hitting the end time of the podcast now. I think that's kind of perfect timing, because I just think that aspect of things is so important, because just as important as it is getting the skills is learning how to be valued with those skills as well. And I think once you have that combination, then you can be unstoppable in this industry. So thanks so much for coming on, Louise. Like, obviously you've already done amazing work in our community, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to get you on as a guest, but we should 100% do it again.
Absolutely.
And if people want to keep up with you, both about your journey at FindMyPast and your other work in terms of like your talk to CoClan, what's the best way to keep in touch?
Yeah, so you can find me on the Code of Career. I think my username is Louise S. Please also look me up on LinkedIn. My name is Louise Shambrook. And yeah, that's pretty much it, because I don't use Twitter. I don't use a lot of other things because I don't like social media that much.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but where I am available, I am very active, and I'm always happy to help anyone out, whether it's you're just starting out, whether it's, okay, I've got a few questions about this, or you just want to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on multiple occasions, your help and advice for people's CVs has literally led to them landing their first jobs in the industry. So definitely, don't be afraid to reach out to yourself on our Discord community, listeners, because you've done some absolutely incredible work in helping our members. But yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. And thank you to the listeners as well for tuning in to another episode of The Code of Career. We are in your RSS feed every other Monday, I think. And please find all the details on thecodeofcareer.com. Thanks for listening.